These are dark psychology tricks used by the CIA, and they're absolutely disturbing. Up first, if you ever feel like you're being watched, which we all definitely have in our life, all you have to do is yawn. After a couple seconds, turn to see if they are also yawning. And since yawning is contagious, anyone else who yawns was watching you 100%. Next, when you want something from somebody else and they don't want to give it to you, start by asking for a ridiculous high amount. This raises expectations and makes them more likely to give you what you want. I don't know about you, but these feel so illegal to know. Instead of deciding something for a person which may get them mad, which makes sense because nobody likes being told what to do, you give them a choice in the boundaries of your decision. For example, do you want A or B? The person is more likely to choose one of the choices you made for them, and not make them feel like you chose for them, but instead they chose for themselves. It's actually insane how easily you can manipulate a person, and what's even crazier is that the CIA is teaching everybody who works there these tactics.
What secrets lie at the top of this mountain? After a 2-year-old boy vanished from his grandparents' house last year, there has been a shocking discovery. 2-year-old Emile Soleil disappeared from his grandparents' house in July 2023. He'd been staying at their holiday home in Haute-Venette, which is a very small community close to a mountain range in France. He was last seen by a neighbour wearing a yellow t-shirt and white shorts, walking in the street on Saturday the 8th of July. He was never seen alive again. Now, huge areas of the area were conducted, but unfortunately there was no trace of the missing child. That was until a local woman was out hiking recently and stumbled upon something horrific. The hiker found a child's skull with only the top teeth in place. Now, she knew if she left the skull there, she may never find it again due to changing weather conditions. She collected the remains and took them immediately to police. The skull was identified as the missing boy via DNA. Sniffer dogs, police, and firemen went to the scene to try and find more evidence. They managed to recover the child's missing clothing. Authorities state there would have been no way for that child to get up that mountain of his own accord.
This is the unsettling truth about Antarctica. What I'm about to explain to you is absolutely mind-blowing, and it might change the way you completely look at the world. Okay, so we all know that Antarctica is the strangest and just the weirdest continent on the planet. But recently, an incredible theory has been spreading, and it could completely change the way we look at this strange continent. According to this theory, Antarctica is not a vast expanse of ice at the bottom of the Earth, but rather a gigantic ice wall surrounding all of the continents. And to make it even crazier, some people even believe that if we were able to cross over this giant ice wall, we would discover other continents that have been intentionally hidden from us. And there we would find other life and creatures we have never seen before, and possibly aliens. In 1992, a new standard world map was released, called the Gleason map, and it depicted Antarctica completely encircling all of our continents. And to make this even crazier, the logo for the United Nations very strongly resembles this map. So is this theory just completely blown out of proportion? Or do you think Antarctica is actually a huge ice wall completely surrounding us, with other continents and life beyond it? All I know is that if this is actually true, I would do anything in my power to just get a glimpse of that other world.
Imagine going on a first date only to get killed and dismembered. Sade Robinson was an absolutely stunning and intelligent 19-year-old woman. She worked at a pizza restaurant and was reported missing on the 1st of April this year after failing to turn up at work. Alarm bells were ringing because she never usually did this. Authorities started looking into her actions the day prior to her disappearance. They discovered footage of her with local man Maxwell Anderson. He was a barman from Milwaukee, and he was spotted with Sade on CCTV, having tea and then getting into a Honda Civic. The pair had then made their way to Sade's home in the car in question. Then there was an alarming discovery. On the 2nd of April at around 7 a.m. that morning, the car was found on fire. Inside the car was clothing that matched the clothing that Sade was wearing. Her phone and human remains were also found nearby. Horrifically, a human leg was found in the lake. Then more body parts started to be discovered in the local area. Now, police were able to track where Sade's phone had been the night that she vanished, and it turns out that it was at Maxwell's house. Officers searched his property and shockingly found blood all over the walls. Maxwell is now being charged with murder and held in custody. Sade's family have set up a not-for-profit organisation to support families of missing black women and children.
The woman behind me is Amanda Rogers, and she died trying to save her dog, Groot. This happened on December 23rd of 2023, and her body was just discovered about a month and a half ago in late March. The crazy thing was, they found her frozen body still holding on to her dog that she was trying to save. Amanda and her husband, Dr. Brian Rogers, were celebrating their 18th wedding anniversary by walking this river. It was the North Fork Eagle River. Her sons and her husband claimed that she loved dogs so much she considered this dog part of her family. The family emphasized in her eyes this was not her trying to save a dog, it was her trying to save a family member. She was a mother to 4 sons of differing ages, and it is just so tragic that she passed. This is such a recent event too. Her family, friends, and colleagues celebrated a celebration of life back in March for her. They emphasized how caring and unique she was. The story is just so unfortunate. I hope Amanda's family is doing well, and I hope they keep cherishing her memories forever. Let me know what you guys think about her story in the comment section below, and reminder, these videos are for informational purposes only.
These are videos you can never watch at night. Okay, so we all know how there's some videos you just can't watch at night because they're that scary. Well, in this series, I'll be showing you all those videos, so be ready to get scared. Okay, so yeah, after watching that video, I'm definitely not sleeping tonight. What even is that thing? And just imagine you just see it crawling in your room right now. All I gotta say is I wish you the best sleeping tonight, because I'm telling you this much, I'm gonna have trouble.
Imagine living with a dead body for 5 months. It was March 2011 in Penwortham in Lancashire. Police received a very strange anonymous tip-off which led them to a local house in the area. There they discovered 54-year-old former lorry driver Guy Blackburn lying deceased in a bed. The man was taken away from the property to undergo a post-mortem. It was clear, however, that he'd been dead for a very long period of time. Now, Guy had been living at the property for a long time, but his health had recently been worsening. He became so unwell that he was unable to leave the property at all. Neighbours got worried about Guy after they hadn't seen him in a few months. Guy was living with his son, 28-year-old Christopher. Now, Christopher was actually a dad to a 10-year-old daughter of his own. Christopher had told his daughter that her granddad was simply asleep. Neighbours would ask Christopher how his dad was, to which he replied, "Yeah, he's fine." However, they began to get suspicious. The post-mortem came back and confirmed that Guy had actually passed away due to heavy drinking and heavy smoking. He'd been deceased since around November 2010. Christopher admitted to living in the house with his dad's dead body. He said he did this in order to claim benefits. He claimed income support and was withdrawing money out of his dead dad's bank account. By the time he was caught, he had claimed nearly £2,000. He admitted to preventing the lawful burial of his dad and stealing money, and he was jailed for 3 years.
The story of the real Halloween murders will shock you. On October 31st, 2022, a 25-year-old man named Colin Brown was murdered. 25-year-old Colin Brown was murdered while making a TikTok? Oh, shit!
This is one of those stories that you hear about and you think, surely that cannot be true. It's that horrific. Not much shocks me anymore, but this did when I heard about it, as it's really hard to believe that a parent could be so cruel to their own child. So over the weekend, a couple were arrested in India after police recovered their 6-year-old boy from a lake infested with crocodiles. They believe that the mother of this child put him in a canal that led to that lake, and ultimately he was attacked by crocodiles in the lake. He had several bite marks and he was missing a hand. He'd actually gone missing the day before, but the search was halted overnight when it became too dark to carry on searching. It resumed in the morning and his body was recovered from the lake. This 6-year-old boy was called Vinod. He had hearing and speech impediments, and his mother said that her husband blamed her for having a child with disabilities, and he repeatedly told her to let him die and get rid of him. She basically said to police, what else was I supposed to do? And she'd thrown him into that canal of her own free will with the help of Vinod's father. It's not clear as yet as to what the charges are going to be against this couple, but they absolutely deserve to go to prison for murder. This was not manslaughter, it was not an accident, it was cold-blooded murder. I'll keep an eye on it and I'll update in the comments when I find out any more information.
This South Carolina woman was just sentenced for the death of her newborn daughter, whose remains were found in a trash bag. This is 27-year-old Brennan Geller. She will now spend more than 2 decades behind bars. She gave birth to her daughter in a car and then shortly after just tossed her in a trash bag. On May 8th, the judge sentenced her to 22 years. She pled guilty for the death of her newborn, and she will have no chance of parole. In 2018, one of her family members actually found the baby in a trash bag inside of her Jeep. An autopsy was conducted. The baby had air in her lungs, which indicated a live birth. She also denied all of the allegations that she was pregnant or that she gave birth from her friends and her boyfriend, which is weird because I feel like he should be the one to know. Now, she gave birth in her car, so obviously there were some complications going on. She went to the hospital to get checked up. She even denied to the medical staff that she had given birth, even though all indications were pointing to the fact that she did give birth. All of her friends, family, and her boyfriend, they're all shocked at this. This is just a wild story. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
A mum from Colorado discovered a heavy plastic bag with maggots all over it in her son's wardrobe. Little did she know she'd just found a murdered man's severed head. It was the 1st of March 2021 in picturesque Colorado. On what started out as an ordinary day, the parents of 19-year-old Brian Cohey would be about to make a discovery that changed their lives forever. The couple made a panicked call to 911 after finding a heavy plastic bag in their son's wardrobe. Inside the bag was a human head and hands. Police obviously turned up straight away to the property and questioned Brian. They told him his parents were concerned about what they found in the wardrobe, to which he'd replied, a human head and hands, from that fella that went missing recently. Police asked him how he ended up with the body parts of the man in his wardrobe. He calmly told them that he'd murdered him with a knife. He told police, I've always wondered what murder felt like. Now, Brian's mum, Terry, obviously had a hideous shock when she made the discovery in the wardrobe. She said that she'd been tidying Brian's room and found a heavy plastic bag covered in maggots. She immediately called her husband and the pair knew something was seriously wrong. The couple told police that their son was obsessed with morbid things. Brian admitted to officers that he'd been driving along when he saw 69-year-old Warren Baines. The man had been homeless at the time. Brian described callously going up to the man and putting a knife in his neck. He stabbed the innocent man to death. He then tried to get away with the murder by pleading insanity. He claimed that mental health issues and environmental stressors caused him to become insane. 2 psychologists concluded that he was in fact sane. Jurors found him guilty and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
The woman you just saw in that video leading the class, 26-year-old Reagan Gray, turned out to be a pedophile. Just last month, Reagan was arrested for having an inappropriate relationship with one of the 15-year-olds that she was in charge of at her church. At the time of the abuse, Reagan was teaching at the Little Rock Christian Academy and volunteered for her church Emmanuel Baptist student ministry. So basically, Reagan tried her hardest to work around as many children as possible. Who knows what kind of horrific thoughts were running through her mind at all times when she was around these kids. Reagan, before her arrest, was a woman of God, someone who devoted her life to living a pure, holy life. But in 2020, the parents of a student allegedly found text messages between his teacher and himself. Keep in mind, he was a minor. They confronted Reagan about it. She said she would cut off all communication with the kid, and she insisted that it had never been physical. However, in a counseling session in 2023, Gray herself admitted that the relationship had been physical and sexual. And after she ratted on herself, an arrest affidavit was secured, and she was eventually arrested. Now, the teenage victim would actually state that Reagan would send him naughty photographs every single day while they were communicating. They also said that they kept their activity to only stuff using the mouth because she said that she and the student needed to stay pure, which is just disgusting. But this church has had a lot of scandals this year. The same church in March of this year revealed that the children's former assistant children's program director, a man named Patrick Stephen Miller, had had an inappropriate relationship with 2 young girls, and he had assaulted them while they were inside of the church. Hopefully the legal system hands this woman a punishment that goes along with the severity of this crime. But in America, you really never know. She'll probably get 2 years and be out on the street again to victimize more young children. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts.
In just a matter of days, not 1 but 2 people were killed at this theme park in separate incidents. It was 2005 at the Farmingdale Park at Adventureland, New York. Now, the park had been going for 43 years without a single death. Then tragedy struck twice in the matter of a few days. 18-year-old Stephen Gary had been stood on the tracks of the children's roller coaster, the Ladybug. He fell face down onto the tracks for an unknown reason and was then run over by the roller coaster car in front of horrified passengers. He was tragically killed in the incident. Then, just days after, on the 2nd of September, a woman named Barbara Brady, aged 45, was visiting the park. She was riding the amusement named Top Scan. Now, this was like a windmill which spun round in the air, and despite Barbara being overweight, she was actually told by the ride attendant that there was no weight limit to the ride and she was allowed on. Horrifically, she was flung from her harness. Her restraint gave way and she was thrown across the park. Her body was discovered in the car park 15 feet from the ride that she'd been on. She'd been launched over a 20-foot high wall, hit a car windscreen on the way down, and then hit the floor.
This OF model allegedly murdered her boyfriend in 2022. This is the story of Courtney Clinton. So before all of this went down, Courtney was a famous model on the internet, if you know what I mean. She had a large OF page, and she frequently posted her travels around the world funded by her own endeavors online. She was also really into fitness and entered a lot of fitness competitions in the past. So at the time of this murder, Courtney had about 2 million followers on Instagram, like she was a full-on famous influencer. And at some point in her journey, Courtney met this guy, Christian Obinselli. They started dating, and it seemed like they had a really good relationship from the outside if you were somebody to just follow their social media. But friends and family knew there was a darkness lurking beneath the surface of the couple. They were fighting, they were always, doing things to each other. And this would all come to a head in April of 2022. So initially, when the police were called to the couple's apartment in April of 2022, they found Courtney in there covered in her boyfriend's blood, holding his bloody body. This is how her hands looked upon her arrest. And yeah, she was obviously very distraught, but she initially claimed that she had stabbed her boyfriend in self-defense. And this is the angle that Courtney's lawyers have been going for the entire time since her arrest, that because of their relationship and the domestic violence that was happening in the relationship, Courtney had to stab her boyfriend because he had been attacking her that night. But then, when the charges were announced against Courtney, prosecutors released this damning video from the elevator in their apartment complex, which clearly shows Courtney beating the hell out of her boyfriend, Christian. I mean, that full video is online, and it is very clear that Christian is trying to de-escalate the situation, and Courtney will not let whatever's happening go and is just wailing on him. Now, Courtney's lawyers, in preparing for the trial, have said that they've identified a couple of times when police have been involved in the disputes between the couple, and they claim that it's going to show that Christian was an aggressor towards Courtney. But Christian's family and attorneys obviously are claiming that Christian was the victim here of domestic violence. And on that day, when Courtney stabbed him in the chest and sliced open one of his arteries, which caused him to die, she was the only one attacking anybody in the apartment. So I'm really curious to see how this trial is going to pan out, and when we get some sort of an update on this, I will be sure to let you guys know what's happening.
This boy's parents bought him a gun as a Christmas present. He would end up becoming a school shooter. It was the 30th of November at Oxford High School in Michigan. Rumours had been circulating at the school about the potential of a mass shooting, and the school had investigated this. The school published a note to parents stating that they couldn't find evidence of an active threat. A horrific incident had occurred in the November, where a severed deer's head was thrown off the school roof onto the playground. Teachers still deemed there to be no threat to students, though. The teachers and students had been part of active shooter drills, and the doors had safety locks fitted. Now, just as a side note, when I worked at an American summer camp, as part of my induction, we had to do active shooter drills with real firearms, and I thought it was absolutely horrifying. On the day in question, 15-year-old Ethan Crumbly entered the school armed with a semi-automatic handgun. CCTV captured him firing into the hallways and systematically going from room to room, classroom to classroom, firing at his fellow students. A voiceover on the intercom alerted students to the threat, and several students and teachers barricaded doors. Ethan went round firing his weapon through the locked doors. Police received over 100 911 calls and raced to the scene. The entire shooting lasted around 5 minutes, and Ethan callously murdered 4 students and injured 7. Students escaped out of windows and were evacuated to nearby locations. A local woman helped fleeing children into her house. Ethan was arrested unharmed. The victims were 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, 16-year-old Tate Meyer, and Hannah St. Juliana, aged 14. Tate was apparently injured trying to stop the gunman. 17-year-old Justin Schilling succumbed to his injuries just days after the shooting. Now, Ethan was charged as an adult for his crimes, and in December 2023, he was given life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 24 years. Interestingly, his parents were then charged with involuntary manslaughter. It transpired that they failed to take steps that they could have taken in order to prevent the tragedy. They'd purchased the gun as a gift for Ethan and failed to keep it properly secured. They'd also actually been called into the school for a discussion after Ethan had drawn a violent picture, including a weapon. It was just hours later that he began his rampage. His parents, Jennifer and James, failed to attend court, and a manhunt ensued. They were finally hunted down by police in Detroit. They were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and were given 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years.
This man was killed after 9/11 for being a Muslim. Balbir Saudi was born in India, and he was one of 5 brothers. He was a member of the Sikh religion, so he had a beard and a turban. Balbir and one of his brothers moved to the United States in 1987 to chase the American dream. He wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but things changed, and he worked at 7-Eleven for several years, and then became a taxi driver for 13 years in Los Angeles and San Francisco. After working hard and saving money, by the year 2000 he had saved up enough to buy a house in Mesa, Arizona. And he purchased a gas station right across the street from the home he bought, and worked 14 hours every single day. Balbir was doing very well for himself and was a very loved member around the community. But then, on September 11th, 2001, the horrible attack occurred, killing 2,996 people. After this attack, people started to blame all Muslims for the attack. And people who were Middle Eastern, Indian, or Pakistani were considered an enemy. And especially those with a beard and a turban. And because Balbir had a beard and a turban, even his regular customers started treating him differently. When 9/11 happened, a man named Frank Roque was working when he heard the news. And the people working with him said it affected him very deeply. When he got home that afternoon, he watched the news covering the attacks and began to cry. On September 12th, Frank didn't go to work and stayed home, which he never did. A coworker called him making sure he was okay, and Frank told him on the phone he wanted to go out and shoot Middle Eastern people. On the morning of September 15th, Frank started his day by drinking 3 large beers and got in his truck and headed to a gas station in Mesa. During that afternoon, a landscaper was showing Balbir a damaged sprinkler right outside of his gas station. Frank then pulled up beside them and rolled down his window and began to fire his gun from his truck. A total of 5 bullets hit Balbir, and Frank then sped off, but he wasn't done yet. Paramedics came to the scene, but sadly, Balbir was pronounced dead. After shooting Balbir, Frank wasn't satisfied with what he'd done. He then went to a home he previously owned that he sold to an Afghan couple, and he then pulled up outside the house and fired 3 bullets from his truck at the house. The family was inside the house when the shots were fired, but luckily nobody was injured. Frank then drove off again, and this time he went to another gas station owned by a Lebanese man. Frank then fired 7 shots through the store window at the store clerk named Anwar Kali. And Anwar got very lucky because not a single bullet hit him. Frank then sped off again and began going to bars around the area. And people that saw him said he was seen crying and ranting to the news on the TV covering what happened in New York. And by the afternoon of September 15th, the police made their way to Frank's house. When they arrived, Frank put his hands in the air and complied with the officers 100%. When he was put in the police car, he told the officers he was a patriot and an American. Once at the station, Frank began to yell at the officers saying, "How can you arrest me and let them run wild?" And he then said he wished his punishment would be to be sent to Afghanistan with a lot of weapons. Frank was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. His lawyer tried to defend him by saying he had voices in his head telling him Arabs must be killed. Frank was found guilty of all charges and was sentenced to death, but that was later changed to just life in prison. And Frank Rode recently died on May 11, 2002 while in Arizona Department Correction custody. He was 62 years old.
Did this man murder 4 children in Michigan in the 1970s? The Oakland County child killings happened in the late 1970s. These 4 children were abducted, held captive for a number of days, then murdered and dumped in public areas. And nobody's ever been arrested for these murders. A suspect sketch exists, but it's known that this person was working with other people. Just a refresher, nearby was North Fox Island where a CP ring was operating in the same time frame. And the guy who was running that ring was a multimillionaire who fled the country before he could ever be arrested. Now, in the previous parts of the series, we talked about Chris Bush and his suspicious unaliving, and the fact that he had this bizarre hand-drawn sketch hanging in his room at the time that he unalived himself. But who would want this guy dead? And did he have anything to do with the crimes? Well, like I said before, his dad was an executive with General Motors, so he was wealthy, politically connected, and he could buy off anybody that he wanted to. And the guy who ran the CP ring was also a millionaire. He was also wealthy and politically connected. So he could also buy off anybody he wanted to. And there are a lot of names, a lot of suspects in this case, but we're just focusing on the possibility that Christopher Bush was involved himself. But we need to introduce Archibald Edward Sloan. Now, this guy was a convicted child predator who lived in the area, who had victimized kids from the same area where the Oakland County child killings were happening. DNA from hair samples collected from his car actually linked him to a number of the crimes, although the hairs were not actually from Archibald himself. To this day, no one knows who the phantom hair is from. And it's known from eyewitness reports that the man who abducted these children was working with another man. A man who some said resembled serial killer John Wayne Gacy, and I can kind of see the resemblance. Now, one of the grand conspiracies about this whole thing is that possibly the children, since they were held captive for days at a time, maybe they were flown out to North Fox Island, they were abused, they were filmed being murdered, and then they were flown back to the area and publicly dumped. But to pull off an operation, they would need some help. And this guy definitely helped. And also this guy definitely helped, which is, in my mind, why he was most likely murdered instead of unalived himself. And the real people who profited off of these murders, the people that were running this island, they have continued to escape justice. But why do I think Chris Bush was involved? Well, over 30 years after the murders, a private polygraph technician came forward and said that he had actually done a polygraph or a lie detector test on someone who had admitted to the murders. But since he didn't work for the police, he had never come forward with the information. And that man who admitted to the murders was none other than Chris Bush, the son of the prominent GM Motors executive who could have easily paid people off, cops, government officials. Now, this story is still in the news because tons of people have worked on this supposed cover-up, and it's pretty crazy. District attorneys have shredded evidence, files have been sealed forever, and still, these murders have gone unsolved to this day.
This new cartel video got 3 million views, and this is a massive trigger warning. The video that I'm about to explain has gone viral on X in the past couple weeks, and it's got over 3 million views. The video opens up with 2 cartel members who are in all black and heavily armed standing in front of a cinder block wall, and in front of them are 2 captives kneeling and blindfolded. A very intimidating man then enters the shot carrying a pretty big machete and begins asking the 2 victims questions. And the translation says the following. The cartel member then asks, "What do you do for a living?" And the captive then responds, "I'm innocent. "I don't like doing anything bad or violent," and referring to his fellow captive, he says, "He told me that he was a spy for Presquezo and that he participated in the lookout in the death." The victim then continues talking, giving the interrogator key information and essentially signing his fellow captive's death warrant. And after the interrogation segment, the execution then takes place. The man who conducted the interrogation moves closer to the victim with the 27-inch machete in his hand. The cartel member with the machete then grabs the hair of the victim on the back of his head and then takes the blade and starts viciously slicing at the victim's throat. You see the victim clench his jaw and make a grimacing face as he is overcome with terrible pain, and as blood sprays out covering his chest. The victim falls to the ground and he doesn't scream once or make any sounds. The killer continues to use the blade and slices back and forth, and the ground is then filled with blood and you see a massive red puddle form quickly. After the victim's throat and the side of his neck have been slashed, the killer then pulls his hair hard to build tension in the neck before hacking down with the machete, and in just one swing the victim is almost decapitated. The killer then hacks one more time, this time completely decapitating the victim. The beheading was done so quickly you could still hear blood pouring out of the victim. His heart didn't even have enough time to pump the majority of the blood out of his body before he was beheaded. Usually in these cartel videos, the beheadings are pretty long and drawn out. But the killer involved in this video was extremely quick and efficient. It's probably the quickest beheading I've ever seen in a cartel video. The killer then grabs the blindfolded head and holds it up to the camera as blood continues to leak from it. Compared to other cartel videos, you would probably describe this as tame, but despite that, the video went extremely viral on X, with one of the videos getting over 3 million views in less than 24 hours. It is believed the second victim was executed off camera, and the body of the victim executed on video was then dumped and wrapped in plastic black wrapping with a narco banner that contained threats to their enemies. While the video is short and the beheading is quick, it's extremely bloody and very disturbing. And as always, I don't recommend to look at it or search it up. This 2024 cartel war going on has had many videos released, and I assume many more will be released in the coming weeks and months.
So this is a bit of a different video to my usual ones. Obviously, normally I just cover cases, but I would like some suggestions. So if you've got any particular case you would like me to cover, please pop it in the comments. It doesn't have to be murder. Obviously, most of mine are, but it doesn't have to be unsolved crimes, anything like that. If anything is something that you're particularly interested in and you want me to cover it, please do pop it in the comments, and try and keep one comment to each case so that I can reply to the comments individually and try and get some videos out there. I'll try and cover as many as I can. I've got my next few videos sorted, but I will go through the comments in a few days and see if there are any that take my fancy, and I will try and do a video next week for some of the comments. So please, if you've got any ideas whatsoever, pop them in the comments and I'll come back and have...
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
This is Twisty the Clown. He's a disgraced clown that will stop at seemingly nothing in order to regain his position as a kids' entertainer. Twisty joined Rusty Westchester's travelling carnival in 1943 and became one of the most popular acts. The other carnival acts, jealous at Twisty's popularity, started spreading rumours that he was a child molester. That rumour ruined his career, and Twisty struggled to find any more clown work. A few years later, he returned home to find out his mother had passed away. Stricken with grief, Twisty blew off his lower jaw with a shotgun in an attempted suicide. He then started wearing a terrifying prosthetic face mask warped into a permanent smile. He then turned into a kidnapper and serial killer, as he attempted to, in his mind, keep children safe from their parents. Shockingly, a series of comic books were published based on the killings of Twisty in the 1950s. It was called Twisty, the Clown Chronicles.
This is the most dangerous prisoner in the world, and you'll never believe why. A little girl named Shiloh was on her phone at night when she got a call from a mysterious number. And on that night, she didn't pick up the phone because her parents weren't home, and she didn't want to talk to any strangers. Thinking it might be one of her friends from school or her teacher, she picked up the phone. And when she picked up the phone, she heard a little girl's voice. The little girl told Shiloh to come to the park at night alone, and told her that she would play with her. Not knowing better, Shiloh decided to leave her house and walk to the park. The time was now 1 a.m. as Shiloh slowly started walking at night to the park. No one was around except her, and it was eerily quiet. Shiloh quickly realized that there was no one around her, so she freaked out and called the number back again. But this time, no one picked up. She was so scared she just wanted to see someone, so she decided to run to the park to see her friend that called. And that's when Shiloh's heart started beating really fast, because she heard a small car parked up behind her. And what happens next will absolutely shock you. If you want to know what happens, like and follow for part 2. This is the most dangerous prisoner in the world, and you'll never believe why, part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, go check out my account right now. Shiloh had already started walking late night alone, before she realized there was no one else there. And her heart started beating so fast because a small car started to pull up behind her. The car slowly kept creeping up towards her, and all the lights were off and all she could see was a shadowy figure inside the car. She was scared that the stranger might even kill her or take her away from her parents, so she decided to call 911 immediately. She told the police that she was running away from people and she needed help. The cops told her not to worry and told them they were immediately on their way. A few seconds later, a police car pulled up to her and asked her what happened. But the scariest part was, by the time the cops came, the prisoner was gone. The little girl identified the criminal as this man. But it's who this prisoner was and why he is the most dangerous prisoner that'll leave you shocked. This man has done some very terrible things and I can't post them on here, so I posted them all on Bigo Live. If you want to know more about the prisoner and what he did, go click the link in my bio to download Bigo Live today.
This 14-year-old girl took her own life 2 days after she was beat up in school. On February 1st, Adriana was attacked by 4 girls as she walked the hallways at Central Regional High School in New Jersey. A video was taken and was posted on social media, and 2 days later, Adriana took her own life. In the video, you see Adriana walking down the hall with her boyfriend when a girl approached her and hit her in the face with a water bottle and then kicked her and dragged her by her hair. It's alleged that the attack happened because one of the girls was jealous of Adriana's friendship with another girl. Adriana's father, Michael, was furious that this video made it on social media and blames the school for not doing enough to protect his daughter. Michael argues that had these girls been detained earlier, these videos would not have been on social media and his daughter would still be alive. But the superintendent of the high school argued that Adriana took her own life due to drug addiction and her father's alleged affair years ago. 3 girls have been charged with 3rd-degree felony assault, and the 4th girl was charged with disorderly conduct.
Have you ever thought about maybe becoming a star? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, what if you and I decided to make, if ever you and I got married and we decided to make our own videos, and we added them to different sites.
So this is Corbin Pinnell, aka Jupiter. So when I first saw videos about this guy, I thought the whole thing was a big meme. But then allegations of grooming, of CP possession, and all of that started to surface, and the story took a dark turn. So Corbin, or Jupiter as he likes to be called, is a guy who just makes videos on TikTok and YouTube. But he has been caught many times talking to minors on video calls, asking them for explicit content. I mean, there have also been screenshots leaked of him asking for these images, him being a total creep, admitting to wanting to be with a minor. This guy has been caught trying to do something sketchy with an underage person so many times that I couldn't even show you all the examples if I had a full 10-minute long video. But he's not just allegedly a pedophile. I mean, check this video out.
I'm 200%
So yeah, it's kind of hard to find the truth in this situation, but a search warrant was allegedly executed on his house dealing with child internet-esque crimes, if you know what I'm talking about. That was a few months ago. I don't know if anything ever came from that, but I mean, there are just so many videos that you can find of this guy where he's literally admitting to sending explicit photographs to, in one of the videos I saw, a child who was 13 years old. He admits to it. He just says it's a transgression of his. I would definitely go check out the creator Linda Binda here on the app. They've done a very good job of covering this whole story, interviewing him multiple times. But yeah, I mean, this is a predator lurking in literal plain sight, admitting to what they've done in the past. So I hope something is done about this situation soon, because it is disturbing.
This woman claims to be Madeleine McCann, who went missing back in 2007. 21-year-old Julia Wendell went onto social media claiming that she thinks she's Madeleine McCann, who went missing from a hotel room while on vacation with her parents in Portugal 16 years ago. Julia created an Instagram account named I Am Madeleine McCann, and she's been posting photos and videos trying to get Madeleine's parents' attention and potentially do a DNA test. She says that investigators in Poland and the UK have ignored her allegations, which eventually led her to posting online. Julia argues that she doesn't have much memory of her childhood due to trauma and PTSD, but she does remember being abused as a child by a man that she says looks very similar to the police sketch of the man that was seen carrying a child in the resort on the night that Madeleine disappeared. Julia says that she confronted her mom and asked to see photos of herself before the age of 3, but her mom doesn't seem to have any. She said that after all this confusion, she began to do her own research and discovered what happened to Madeleine and began piecing together their similarities. Julia went onto social media and showed a photo of a rare speck in her eye that Madeleine also had. Madeleine would have been 19 years old right now, and even though Julia is 21 years old, she believes her age could be wrong. But authorities are convinced that 46-year-old Christian Bruckner, who lived in Praia da Luz, Portugal between 1995 and 2007, abducted and murdered Madeleine. And unfortunately, authorities have not been able to press charges on Chris because they don't have enough evidence to prove it. Jerry and Kate McCann have apparently agreed to move forward with a DNA test, and we should know very soon if Julia is really Madeleine McCann.
This story has made me feel sick to my stomach. The fact that there are individuals like this out there preying on young girls really is sickening. This individual was sentenced yesterday for just that, and what makes this even worse in this case is that up until June this year, he was a serving police officer with Thames Valley Police. 23-year-old PC Luke Horner abused his position of trust and began grooming girls online in June this year. He actually managed to persuade a 13-year-old girl to hand over her address and let him in while no one else was home. He travelled for over an hour to meet this child and rape her in her own bedroom. And I'm calling it rape because that's what it is. But in the eyes of the UK law, it's not. He actually sealed his own fate by using the girl's mobile phone to record the whole ordeal. Her mum found the video and she called the police. Luke was arrested and he admitted his crime, but due to the fact that the girl was over the age of 12, he was not charged with rape. He was charged with sexual activity with a child and given a 6-year sentence. Had she been just a few months younger, his sentence would have been longer. And if that's not all bad enough, he only has to serve half of that sentence. So he'll be released on licence in 3 years' time. When the full 6-year sentence is up, he'll be free to live his life and he'll only be 29. He might even go on and get married and have children of his own one day. Apparently in court yesterday, Luke appeared tearful as he was given his sentence, and he also listened to a victim impact statement from the mother of the young girl. It said, "How can I sleep at night knowing what he did? How can he? How did he go to work, put his uniform on, and face his colleagues knowing what he did? I feel sick to my stomach every time I think about it." I personally think that's an absolute joke of a sentence for his crime, and I just hope that his victim is getting the support that she needs and deserves.
Began as a normal day in July 2019. That was until locals in a neighbourhood in New South Wales, Australia, entered a real-life horror film. A woman was covered in blood, yelling for people to phone the police. The woman in question was Jessica Camilleri, and the neighbourhood would never be the same again. Jessica was the daughter of Vince and Rita Camilleri, and she had a troubled upbringing. She struggled with various mental health issues, including bipolar and paranoia. She was bullied at school and was eventually removed after an assault. Her behaviour started escalating and she frequently had violent outbursts. Despite her parents getting divorced, her mum Rita remained dedicated to looking after Jessica. In 2018, Jessica was detained in a psychiatric facility after attacking a woman in a doctor's waiting room. She had also attacked several members of her family and random members of the public prior to this. Things got worse while she was in the facility. She ended up attacking a nurse and her mum insisted on discharging her. She said things would be fine and she would look after Jessica at home. The pair actually had a fairly good relationship and they would send each other sweet messages. However, Jessica started to become obsessed with a man that she knew, harassing him with phone calls and threatening him. Rita actually had to take her to the police station to try and scare her into stopping. It worked for a while and the calls died down. Then on July the 20th, 2019, while out walking with her mum, Jessica had an episode of paranoia. Suddenly, she decided that her mum was trying to humiliate her. She escalated into a violent rage, and her mum had to try and call the doctor to come and assess her. However, when the doctor arrived at the house, Jessica actually chased him out. As Rita tried to phone for emergency services, Jessica attacked her with 7 knives. She decapitated her mum and dragged her head outside onto the pavement. Covered in blood, she ran to her neighbours' houses, yelling that she'd killed her mum. When police arrived at the scene, Jessica was stood asking if it was possible to bring someone back to life if they didn't have a head. The crime scene was so disturbing that many of the emergency services personnel had to get trauma therapy. In 2020, Jessica was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter due to her complex psychiatric illnesses. She was eventually given 16 years in prison.
I personally hate family vlogging channels because I feel like it's very exploitative of the children who really can't consent to being in the content, but stories like this make me especially hate it. So this is Ruby Frank, the woman who ran the YouTube channel 8 Passengers. And in the past few days, more details have come out about the abuse she put her own children through, and they're just extremely disturbing. And this shows how deceiving social media can be. I mean, look at this family. They seem picture perfect, right? They're dressed so well, they're all smiling, they look so happy. You would have no idea that the mother would be arrested for 6 counts of child abuse. So this whole story really broke when Ruby's 12-year-old son escaped the house in Utah that they were living in and ran to the neighbors asking for food and water. Obviously, these neighbors called this into the police. The police showed up at the house and they found her 10-year-old daughter in a similar state of malnourishment and abuse. According to the police report, the children appeared to be emaciated and malnourished, and they had open wounds on their bodies with duct tape around their extremities. So before this all happened, Ruby tried to portray herself as a very hardline mom that valued punishment. Her views on parenting were very controversial, and yes, of course, she was very religious. But some of the new allegations being brought up by her own children are disturbing. So both Ruby and her podcast partner, Jody Hildebrandt, were arrested and charged with child abuse. And recently, Jody's niece did an interview and described some of the things she was put through. So while Jessie was living with her aunt, Ruby, she said that Ruby would lock her in her room and make her write out all of her sins on a piece of paper. Ruby also forced her to sleep outside in the snow. She duct taped her body frequently as punishment. And obviously there was tons of other physical and emotional abuse that was going on. So like I said, Ruby loved to be known as a tough love parent. She advocated for forcing her children to do chores before breakfast. She even said on a YouTube video that she hoped the chores would bring the children pain. I mean, there's a laundry list of terrible things that this woman did to her kids. And according to friends and other family members, this abuse had been going on for a very long time. In fact, some people actually stated that they've been trying to tell the police about this for years, but nobody had really listened. Meanwhile, Ruby had used her children to make hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars on YouTube. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, she was brutally, that's a quote from the article, brutally abusing them. I'm just so excited that this channel was finally taken down. I mean, I watched a YouTube video about 8 Passengers, I think a year and a half, 2 years ago, describing how disturbing the video content is. I definitely didn't expect it to escalate to this level, but I'm just glad this channel's gone and the abuse has finally been put to an end.
Mystery continues as the body of Suzanne Morphew is found after her disappearance. 49-year-old Suzanne was reported missing on the 10th of May 2020. She had apparently left her home in Colorado to go on a bike ride. After vanishing, her bike was discovered close by in a ravine. Mysteriously though, nobody actually reported ever seeing her riding her bike that day. No clothing, blood or evidence of a struggle were found at the scene, and police believe that the scene may have been staged. Authorities launched a huge search and some of her belongings were found shortly after. Suzanne's adult daughters had been away at the time of her disappearance, and her husband Barry claimed that he left the house early that morning to go to a job 150 miles away. Suzanne and Barry met in high school and married in '94. They had 2 daughters, Mallory and Macy. However, their marriage had been in trouble, and it's believed that Suzanne had asked Barry for a divorce. Worryingly, Suzanne texted one of her friends saying, "I would not feel safe alone with him," in reference to Barry. 10 days after her disappearance, authorities made a crazy discovery. They found a spy pen in a wardrobe in the couple's bedroom. They found out the pen was actually Suzanne's. She'd bought it hoping to catch Barry having an affair. Instead, she accidentally recorded conversations she was having with her secret lover. Now, the man in question had a wife and children and was from Michigan, and he actually cooperated with the investigation and he had an alibi that checked out. The day before Suzanne was reported missing, on May the 9th, she sent her secret lover a selfie. Barry was out at the time and he then sent Suzanne a text saying he was on his way home. Investigators accused Barry of returning home, killing her and cleaning up the crime scene. However, there was no actual evidence of this. Police also found worrying things on Barry's phone. For some reason, Barry had deleted a message of Suzanne, stated that she was done with the relationship and wanted to be civil. Barry's phone also appeared to show it pinging all around the house on May the 9th, the day before she was reported missing. He claimed that he was running around the property shooting chipmunks. Police think that he may have been running around the house trying to shoot Suzanne. This image shows all the areas where the phone pinged in a short space of time. Barry also told the investigators that he went to bed at 8 p.m. However, his truck's computer shows that it was reversed towards the house at around 9:30 p.m. Investigators also worryingly found a clear plastic needle cap in the dryer in the house. They theorized that Barry may have used a tranquilizer gun to shoot Suzanne, and this was the cap of the syringe. Now, although Barry admitted that he was experienced at shooting tranquilizer darts and he regularly used them to shoot deer, he stated that he doesn't know why it was there and there isn't actually anything linking him to that item. Strangely, on the day that Suzanne was reported missing, Barry was captured on CCTV throwing out rubbish at various locations. Investigators stated that he may have been disposing of evidence. Barry also had multiple scratch marks on his arms. However, in a strange twist in this case, male DNA was found in Suzanne's Range Rover. The DNA was tested and revealed that it was at least a partial match to an unnamed man connected to 3 unsolved sexual assault cases in Tempe, Phoenix, and Chicago. Now, back in April 2022, Barry was actually set to stand trial for Suzanne's murder. However, the case was dismissed without prejudice, and this actually means that the prosecution could refile charges in the future. Barry maintains his innocence and his 2 daughters have stuck by him too. Some are calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case. You will not believe this insane plot twist. In 2008, Carolyn Watson and Julian Butchwald were a young religious couple. They were living in Melbourne, Australia, and had been together around 2 years. Julian was driving the pair to a picnic date in the car, but he actually stopped the car suddenly, noticing an animal on the side of the road. Suddenly, something horrific happened. Carolyn's vision went completely black after being blindfolded by a terrifying masked man. All she could work out was she was being stripped off and thrown into a vehicle. The car finally stopped and she took her blindfold off. and she was really relieved to see that her boyfriend was by her side. He'd also been stripped off, and the couple were completely in the middle of nowhere. The pair managed to untie themselves, but were having to just wander around aimlessly for a week, trying to find safety. Meanwhile, police were desperately searching for the couple. Family and friends were really concerned, and they knew how out of character this was for the pair to go missing. They sent out air and water search teams, but just couldn't locate the couple. As the missing pair were very religious, they'd actually vowed to be celibate until marriage, but Julian started to suggest that it might be a good idea to break this celibacy in order to keep them warm. Finally, a local farmer found the couple and alerted police. However, they quickly found that the story didn't really add up. Julian soon confessed to police that he'd actually made the whole thing up and he'd staged the kidnapping. His motive was purely to try and get his girlfriend to break their vow of celibacy.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released.
My daughter I bet you didn't know the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based off true events. I am Bubba Sawyer, but you may know me as Leatherface. I was born into a deranged family of cannibals and sadistic killers living in a remote Texas farmhouse. My mother was a quiet woman, but my father was a monster. He was an abusive alcoholic who would beat my mother and us kids whenever he got the chance. As a child, I was always fascinated with the animals that my father would bring home to slaughter. I would watch as he killed them, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the beginning of my descent into madness. One day, my father brought home a chainsaw. It was a massive tool, and I was in awe of it. I begged my father to let me use it, and he eventually gave in. From that moment on, I was hooked. I would spend hours on end, cutting through trees, and anything else that I could find. The sound of the chainsaw was like music to my ears. It was my escape from the reality of my life. But it wasn't until my father died that I truly lost my mind. I inherited his house, and I turned it into my own personal slaughterhouse. I would lure people in and kill them using my trusty chainsaw to do the deed. The screams of my victims were like a symphony to me. One day, a man named Kirk entered my home to barter for gas. I attacked him with a hammer, killing him. A woman named Pam came in after him. She found my living room strewn with human and animal bones. I grabbed her, impaled her on a meat hook, and dismembered Kirk's body with my chainsaw as Pam watched. Jerry came looking for them both. He found Pam's nearly dead, spasming body in a chest freezer. I killed him with a hammer. Later that night, I ambushed their two surviving friends, Sally and Franklin. I killed Franklin with my chainsaw. I captured Sally and brought her back to the house. We tried to include Grandpa in murdering her with a hammer, but Grandpa's grip was weak, and he kept dropping the hammer repeatedly. Sally broke free and ran onto our road in front of our house, pursued by my family. The truck driver attacks me with a large wrench, injuring me, and escaped on foot. Sally, covered in blood, flags down a passing pickup truck and climbs into the bed, narrowly escaping me. I was so angry I let her get away. My family won't be happy about this.